technicalities. Joining me to discuss the procedure is Mr. Matthew Crocker. He is a consultant neurosurgeon at St George's Hospital. Welcome to you indeed. Let's just look at this process according to Dr. Canavera, the first stage will involve the patient and donor's bodies being cooled down so the brain cells don't die during the operation, and then the neck will be partially cut through and the blood vessels will then be connected to the other body with tubes. So far so simple?
So simple, yes. I mean, I haven't done any of these myself recently, but in theory every section has a grounding in science and in a certain amount of medical practice. So the practice of cutting or excluding blood vessels that supply the brain from the circulation and then restoring that circulation temporarily to the brain with tubes is very well recognised.
And what do you gain from lowering the temperature?
Again, lowering the temperature of the whole body and hence the brain to between 10 and 20 degrees, usually around 15 to 70 degrees, is a very well recognised technique used for complex neurosurgery or cardiovascular surgery, in which there is an expectation that the brain will be starved of its blood and oxygen supply for a substantial period.
OK, well, let's move on then, because the next stage is that the spinal cord is cut with a very sharp knife to minimise damage, and the donor head is then moved onto the recipient's body, and the spinal cord is fused together with a substance called polyethylene glycol, which is hoped will repair the joint. I mean, I can just about remember my organic chemistry. That doesn't sound like a particularly sophisticated substance to do that.
Well, it's a form of glue, and again, the idea of cutting the spinal cord sharply rather than bluntly has a little medical support in terms of the fact that the only successful or the well-recognised success with spinal cord injury surgery came from a man who had a stab injury rather than a blunt injury to the cord.
I mean, I've got to ask you, at this point, someone is having their head cut off, which
So they are.
most people would normally define as death, really. I mean, is it OK to cut someone's head off for a doctor to do it?
Well, I'm not sure any of this is really OK, and it requires a little more thought, doesn't it? But yes, your point is entirely reasonable. At what point one dies, I believe your ethicist might have a consideration about that. But the heart is routinely stopped in open heart surgery, of course. In cardiac surgery, that's no longer unusual.
So this is the next step, putting together the muscle and the blood vessels. I mean, has this ever been done on this scale?
On this scale? No, I'm sure it has.
Yeah. And then we move on, and the body, after the operation is successful, is kept in a coma for several weeks to prevent people moving, and presumably so everything fuses together.
Yeah, I presume. One can reattach or screw together the spinal column, and that's done very regularly for injuries and so forth. And those people do not need to be kept in a coma. The idea of this, I presume, is to allow the gluing of the spinal cord to take root and so forth. But again, that is very speculative to be.
I mean, we have seen arms and legs reattached, haven't we?
Of course, yes, many times, yeah.
But that's a lot simpler than presumably doing a spinal cord.
Well, the spinal cord is, of course, to state the obvious, the central issue here. And an arm and leg have nerves, have arteries, veins, and muscles and bones. But the issue here is the fact that someone with a spinal cord which is functioning, has a neurological function, however difficult, is facing having that completely removed.